how business and the economy are changing and what that means for you. It's the third week of January 2015, and here are my 3 cents, the 3 things you most need to know about the world economy this week. First, quantitative easing is coming to Europe. Mario Draghi, who runs the European Central Bank, announced Thursday they will buy up government bonds, a lot of them, 60 billion euros a month worth of them. The goal is to push down interest rates even more, which will hopefully get private investors to take their money out of bonds and actually invest it in stuff that makes the European economy grow. Stocks soared on the news. The French and German stock indices rose 1.5% on Thursday, and Italian stocks were up 2.5%. The euro fell, which was part of the plan. Europe needs a weaker euro, so products from places like Italy and Spain will get cheaper, and Spanish and Italian people can get back to work making stuff and exporting it. So that's all good news, but this program is still smaller than the easing programs that have been done in the U.S. and Japan, and the ECB has failed to juice the European economy in the past. So far, they haven't even managed to approach their 2% inflation target, which is part of the reason Europe's economy has lagged ours so much for the last few years. We'll see if this time is different. Next to the United States, President Obama noted in his State of the Union address that, quote, "We have risen from recession freer to write our own future than any other nation on earth." That was sort of a dig at Europe's ongoing troubles. But the president still laid out a series of economic proposals aiming to sustain and improve the strong economic recovery we're enjoying here. Now, most of those proposals won't become law since Republicans run Congress, but his policies reflect an important shift in the consensus on economic policy. At the end of the Reagan administration, the top federal income tax rate was 28 on everything. Under Bill Clinton, that went up to 42 on wages, but down to 20 on capital gains. Then George W. Bush cut capital gains taxes again. The economic prescription held out by Republicans and many Democrats for decades was that it was really important to hold down taxes specifically on capital. That changed in 2008. President Obama has already raised capital gains taxes twice, and on Tuesday he called for a third increase. He wants to take the rate back to 28, where it was under Reagan, and he wants to make it harder for people to shield their assets from capital gains tax. Part of the reason high capital gains taxes are coming back into fashion is what we saw during the Bush administration. Deep cuts in capital tax rates did not seem to improve the economy, but did worsen income inequality. You can watch for whatever Democrat runs for president after Obama, who could that be, to echo his call for those taxes to go up. Now, finally, to New York. Have you ever dreamed of a job where you do very little work and get paid a lot of money? Well, Sheldon Silver had 2 of those, and it doesn't seem to be working out so well. That's what prosecutor Preet Bharara explained on Thursday about why he was indicting Silver, the Speaker of the State Assembly, who had 2 puzzlingly high-paying legal jobs on the side.
For many years, New Yorkers have also asked the question, what exactly does Speaker Silver do to earn his substantial outside income? Well, the head-scratching can come to an end on that score, too, because we answer that question today as well. He does nothing. As alleged, Speaker Silver never did any actual legal work. He simply sat back and collected millions of dollars by cashing in on his public office and his political influence.
Alas, another demonstration that if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. We'll be right back to talk about Andrew Cuomo's plan to build a train that leaves LaGuardia Airport and then goes the wrong way. That's next.
And something that we're going to do, which I'm very excited about, which is a new train service that will get to LaGuardia. You can't get to LaGuardia by train today, and that really is inexcusable. We will construct an air train that will connect with the Route 7 subway line and the Long Island Railroad at Willets Point. That is about 1.5 miles construction. It will run along the Grand Central Parkway in an area that we believe won't create an undue burden to any of the neighboring structures and connect a one ride from the subway system or the Long Island Railroad to LaGuardia, which is truly long overdue.
You heard it, folks. After many failed attempts, New Yorkers may finally get a rail link to LaGuardia Airport. But there's a catch. As you may know, Manhattan is west of LaGuardia, but the train Governor Cuomo wants to build would start from LaGuardia and then go southeast, away from Manhattan to Flushing, Queens. Yes, that Flushing, where the nanny was from. Once in Flushing, you'd have to board a subway that would take about half an hour to get to Midtown Manhattan. As a result, from most places in New York, using the new train would actually take longer than the way you can get to the airport right now but on transit by a bus. So why would we spend $500 million to build this thing? Yona Freemark of the Transport Politic joins me now from Chicago to talk about how we got here. So why is this train going to go the wrong way?
Well, it's clear, very clear, that the governor chose this alignment because he wanted to choose an alignment that didn't have community objections associated with it. There was a plan for an extension of a subway train from Astoria back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, but that had significant objections from the communities around it. And Governor Cuomo decided he wanted a train no matter where it went, and he wanted that train to avoid interacting with any communities.
Yeah, but I mean, so I understand that, you know, you build this thing over a freeway into a parking lot and nobody objects to it. But then as you describe in your post, you end up with a train where it actually takes longer to get to the airport this way than it would take if you just do what you can do right now, which is take a bus to the airport. So is this thing even worth building at all? Like, what's the point of the thing?
Well, one of the most basic things that we have to remember about transportation in general, but public transportation too, is that geography really matters. You have to make sure that the alignment of the system that you're creating, goes in the directions that people want to go. And the fact is that they've selected a project that will go in the wrong direction, as you pointed out. I don't think that many people are going to take this project because even if it's built, and even if the project creates a slightly more reliable system, it's going to create longer travel times for people to get to the airport.
So one of the interesting things about rail is that people seem to have this almost sexual attraction to trains. Like, you try to talk people into getting on a bus, and they're like, ew, a bus. Like, who takes a bus? So is part of the idea behind this that even if it'll take longer, people, especially tourists, because we're talking about an airport link, will feel more comfortable or more like it's something they would do, that they get on this transit link rather than, or is there some way, if we took the $500 million it'll cost to build this thing, could we use $500 million to convince people it's okay to get on a bus?
Well, I think a lot of people refer to that as technological fetishism. And it's a big problem because while rail has a lot of benefits in a lot of places, we need to make sure that we're using our bus system as effective as possible. One of the things that we're working on in Chicago is implementing a bus rapid transit system, which basically means creating dedicated lanes for buses on streets so that they're more reliable, so that they're quicker, so that the stations are more appealing for customers. And those kind of improvements can make the bus system just as effective as the rail system can be in most cases. And the truth is that the governor could be investing in lots of bus rapid transit systems around New York City with this money, including better access to LaGuardia Airport, and chose not to.
Yeah, no, they've done some of that here right now. If sitting right where I am at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, I could go downstairs, get on the subway, 5 subway stops, and then get on a bus that goes nonstop to LaGuardia. Probably takes about 30 minutes, but people don't think of that as a reasonable way to get to the airport. And honestly, that's not usually how I get to the airport, but it is available. But that sort of gets to an important point. There's a lot of money that gets spent on transit links to airports. It's a big priority in lots of transit systems around the country. But one of the things that I find interesting people write about is these don't generate as much demand as people think. Are we overbuilding these airport connections?
You know, I think the biggest issue that we have in transportation in general is a lack of adequate resources. And this is true at the national level, at the state level, and at the local level in most places around the country. And the result of the lack of adequate resources is that we really need to make sure that we're prioritizing the projects that are going to serve the most people the most effectively. And airport links, while beneficial for a lot of people, and certainly they're important, effectively do not serve as many people as projects that serve, for example, high-density neighborhoods or job centers. Those are much more effective in bringing people to work every day, making sure that people have access to jobs, and reducing inequality of opportunity. And airport links don't really do that.
And so is it the reason we focus on it then is that you have a lot of higher income people who sort of the main time they think about that they might use transit is to go to the airport, especially in cities other than New York?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think that people who are in the elite class can think of not driving their car in one circumstance, and that's when going to the airport because they don't feel like leaving their car there. So that's the one time where they say, oh, you know what, this would be a really good project for a rail link. And so they focus all their energy on that and they prioritize that. And in fact, the New York region, as with many regions, has already spent billions of dollars building these rail links to airports. You know, JFK and Newark both have rail links like this. But the reality is most people still drive to those places.
So finally, you wrote this post. Interestingly, you talked about how Cuomo's plan will take longer to get to the airport, but there are these 2 other routes that people have talked about building trains to the airport that would sort of go more directly toward Manhattan. And I was surprised you showed there really isn't a lot of time gain from any of them. Like none of these ways we can build rail to LaGuardia really save more than 3 or 4 minutes for the typical passenger. So if you were in charge of the MTA and the Port Authority, if you were governor, what if anything would you build here?
You know, my first priority would be making sure that the existing bus services are as effective as possible. And that means dedicating bus lanes on the streets, making sure that we have the operations money to make sure that we're running a lot of buses so people don't have to wait for buses, and making the interchanges between the bus system and the rail system, such as in Jackson Heights, just nicer places to be so people feel comfortable going there and are willing to get on the bus.
Yeah. So try to make the buses sexy and then see if we can get people to board them. Great. Thank you so much for joining me, Yonah. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be right back with Matt Zeitlin from BuzzFeed, who will explain how we can use Super Bowl ads to forecast the economy. That's next. The advertising power of a Super Bowl commercial is immense. With well over 100 million viewers, the advertising slots are some of the most sought-after ad venues in the world. But when you look past the glitz and glam of product plugging, these ads can give us a benchmark on the American economy. Matt Zeitlin from BuzzFeed is here with me now to talk about his great piece called The History of the American Economy Told Through Super Bowl Ads. So what inspired this was a fantastic piece of trolling from The Verge, which is a technology blog from Vox Media, which announced that they were taking out a Super Bowl ad. And this, got all these people being like, why is an online publisher spending $4 million? And then we found out, what did we find out about
that? They're actually spending $700. It's airing in one local market in Helena, Montana. So it was a well-executed prank.
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's still a big deal. Helena is, a key market for the tech blog industry. But so I really like what you did here. You went back and looked through some prominent Super Bowl ads from the decades and found what they could tell us about the economy. So starting with the 1984 ad from Apple, which I think is the most iconic Super Bowl ad.
That's probably the most important ad, or definitely the most important Super Bowl ad in history. It's Apple really came out on the national stage. It really kind of shaped Silicon Valley's conception of itself as kind of a rebellious place fighting against, big companies like IBM. And it's really how people think of Apple to this day.
Yeah, and so that sort of that sort of built this. It's interesting to me actually because this was an ad that was very zeitgeisty, but Apple didn't really do that well as a business through this period. It took some 20 years for them to deliver on the promise of that.
Yeah, but it is kind of a benchmark for kind of the personal computer revolution, which was really one of the first Silicon Valley booms, and that happened in the 80s.
Yeah, and so a lot of this is about tech booms and sometimes tech over booms. Let's take a look at the Pets.com ad from, what was this, 2000 or 1999?
2000.
Yeah.
The 2000 Super Bowl is really a benchmark for Super Bowl advertising. I think about 10 .coms bought out Super Bowl ads, so they're spending about $1 million. Yeah. And Pets.com went out of business less than a year later after this ad.
Let's watch that ad, refresh everybody's memory.
Okay, Dino, I gotta go to a lot of stores to get what you like. I'll be back.
If you leave me now, you'll take away the biggest part of me. Ooh, no, baby, please don't go. Ooh, girl, I just want you to stay. Hey man, I'm getting car sick. I think I'm gonna boot.
So back then, a Super Bowl ad was about $2 million or something. Yeah. My favorite thing about that is Pets.com shortly thereafter ends up in bankruptcy. One of their few valuable assets is the intellectual property of that dog.
Exactly.
Which got sold off and ended up in ads for other things. But sort of, do you think this has made people reluctant to take out Super Bowl ads for their startup businesses now?
Yeah, there's definitely a stigma around technology. Startup technology companies spending their investors' money on Super Bowl ads. You don't really see the kind of buzziest technology companies doing that. Like, I don't think you're going to see a Dropbox or Uber ad in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. There was another one from this era that actually made reference to how sort of expensive and wasteful its ad was. This is an ad for E-Trade. Or actually, this is from the 2008 Super Bowl, so this is reflecting another bubble. Let's take a look.
A lot of people are like, aren't you too young to invest in the markets? And, don't worry about it. I just look young. I mean, you don't know how old I am. And B, I use E-Trade, so check it. Click. I just bought stock. You just saw me buy stock. No big deal. I mean, if I can do it, you can do it. Whoa.
It's so easy, there are 1,000 new accounts a day at E-Trade.
So great. So this is an ad about how any idiot can invest in the stock market.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. So this airs in January 2008. When economists have looked back, the recession had already started. E-Trade's stock price was in free fall, and the S&P 500 had peaked a few months before. So this is not even at the bubble. The bubble's already started deflating, and E-Trade's going out and telling people how easy it is to invest in the stock market.
And so, in the ensuing years, one interesting thing is we got this Chrysler ad, a 2-minute ad, sort of about the rebirth of Chrysler out of bankruptcy. This one, I think, is one that still remains to be seen whether that was right or not.
Yeah, but Chrysler is with Fiat a functioning company, and I think as a stand-in for the American auto industry, those companies, GM, Chrysler, they're definitely back. They're making cars. They're not on the verge of bankruptcy anymore. They're selling more cars than they used to. And this ad, I think, was actually a little after we knew they were going to come back, but I think it was very significant. And this is one of those ads that got a huge organic response. I think lots of people felt genuinely moved by it, which you cannot say about any ad, I think, for E-Trade or Pets.com.
You don't think people are moved by the E-Trade baby? It's, I guess that would be kind of creepy.
I think the advertising firm that came up with it was quite moved by it.
So what should we be watching for in the Super Bowl this year, aside from, the inflation of the balls? Like, what economic trends do you see going on right now that we should be looking for showing up in the ads?
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting Super Bowl advertisers is Squarespace. They advertised for the first time last year, and they're going to advertise again this year. They're a company that helps you make their own websites. They advertise on a lot of podcasts, and I think they're kind of really, really a kind of significant benchmark for this kind of wave of the technology revolution where web products, web properties are so much easier for individuals to make, and anyone can make a pretty decent-looking website using Squarespace, and I think that's something that's going to stay. It's not the Pets.com of the Super Bowl.
And then looking to the Verge thing, obviously the gimmick where you just buy in one very small market in the middle of nowhere in the Rockies is one thing, but a lot of companies will come out and say, oh, we're running a Super Bowl ad, and then it turns out that they're not really running a national ad. They're running it in some number of markets, hoping to get free media on segments like this, talking about the ad. You had mentioned something about, what was it, cat food company? Or
So Purina is running an ad in a few markets named after cats. So in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and Los Gatos, California. Old Milwaukee famously ran these kind of surreal Will Ferrell ads that would run, I think, in one market, and then sports blogs especially would pick up on them the next day, and they would get a lot of free media. Yeah,
so make sure if you're watching a Super Bowl ad, it's a real Super Bowl ad that the company wasted $4.3 million on. Not any of this stupid free media stuff.
That only journalists like us are interested in.
Matt, thank you so much for coming in. You're actually going to stick around after the break. We'll bring in MSNBC's Crystal Ball and the Wall Street Journal's John Carney to talk all about what happened in the State of the Union. We'll be back. Hey everyone, welcome back to 3 Cents. Here with me now, BuzzFeed reporter Matt Zeitlin, MSNBC's Crystal Ball, and John Carney from the Wall Street Journal. Thanks everybody for coming in today. So we just had the State of the Union this week, and the president, as he does, had a number of proposals to raise taxes, and there were sort of two main components to that. One was capital gains tax, which we'll get to in a second. But I want to talk about his call for a charge on banks with a lot of assets, which would raise about $110 billion over 10 years. This is an idea that's had an interesting level of bipartisan support in the past. Dave Camp had proposed a similar thing as part of tax reform,
which was immediately scuttled by his Republican colleagues, but
fair enough. And then also you have David Vitter, who's a very conservative Republican, who one of his top issues has been basically trying to break up large banks. Is this, you know, if we set aside the cap gains thing, which Republicans are not going to go for, is this something that there could be some agreement about if you took the money and gave it back to taxpayers in some way?
As far as I can tell, this is one of those issues that seems to kind of unite the left wing of the Democratic caucus and the right wing of the Republican caucus, but not really the people that end up actually making the kind of big decisions about what's included in legislation. And it polls really well, but you know, it's only people like David Vitter and Sherrod Brown who end up actually talking about it.
And look, we just saw the banks win a big victory by having what they call the derivatives push out get repealed. It seems to be very unlikely that we're going to succeed in taxing the big banks.
Yeah.
If they can win, you know, on repealing parts of Dodd-Frank already before the Republican Senate took over, they can win. You know, they're going to be able to fight this. You know, all the way to the bank.
That's exactly the thing. I mean, who gives Republicans the money for their campaigns, right? They have massive disproportionate influence. So it's one of those policies where even if 99% of America said, yes, we think there should be a tax on big banks, Republican politicians are never going to go
and
for it.
And it's not just Republicans, though. Democrats there are plenty of Democrats who are also get a lot of money from banks. Barack Obama himself was the biggest receiver of Goldman Sachs money ever.
Well, but he wants this asset charge.
He says he wants it. It plays well, but I'm not sure he has any confidence at all that this is going to become law.
He also doesn't have to run for election again.
Right.
This is the same thing we've seen with senators and congressmen too. When they're not up for re-election, they propose things that are going to penalize the banks. When anybody who is up for re-election, which unfortunately is almost everybody else, always ends up coming out against it.
And the example of Dave Camp, right, former Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, is illustrative there. He proposed that tax, but he also was retiring. So there was nothing for him to lose. Republicans immediately said, like, oh, that's nice, okay, go away.
Yeah. This is interesting to me in that, you know, you have you have Republicans, you know, come back and control both houses of Congress. And then one thing you hear a lot about, frankly, you heard a lot about in the last couple of years is, oh, we need to repeal the medical device tax. And no, I understand, you know, why Republicans don't like the medical device tax, but the idea that the mandate for the Republican Congress, what all those conservative Republicans were out there voting for, was that they were furious about a tax on the medical device industry, and that was at the top of the agenda. It just seems, where is the, you know, there are a lot of Republicans who do want
giveaway. That's all it is.
There are a lot of Republican voters who want tax cuts. They want tax cuts that apply to them. The question is, where is the Republican focus on? Let's cut taxes on our base voters.
Or even, where's the big idea here, right? Like a medical device tax. If we're worried about the economy being too slow or slowing down, why not have a pro-growth tax cut? That seems nowhere on anybody's agenda right now.
Right. Well, so speaking of tax cuts and growth, we've seen a real shift over the last 15 years on capital gains tax, which I got at the top of the show. President Obama is calling for his third increase in capital gains tax. He's already had 2 in his administration. This comes off like 30 years when we had both Republicans and Democrats cutting the capital gains tax. Bill Clinton raised income taxes on regular income, but actually cut them substantially on capital gains taxes. What's driven this shift in opinion where capital gains tax cuts have fallen out of fashion? I
think it's kind of the awareness of inequality. I mean, the vast majority of capital gains are paid by people kind of the higher end of the income distribution, and I think, you know, that seems fine when the economy is growing for everyone, when there's lots of growth, wages are going up. But when that's not happening, when wages are stagnant, inequality is increasing, capital gains are really an obvious place to go after.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's become increasingly hard just to make the argument, too, that there's any real logic or reason to have capital gains at a more favorable rate. And when you look historically, that hasn't correlated with growth. So then you do go to this question of fairness and, like, why should some rich person who's just has these assets sitting on them, appreciating. Why should they get better tax treatment than me working hard at my job? So I think it does go to that. I mean, you also had the Simpson-Bowles Commission, for example, proposing, like, bringing those rates into alignment.
Right.
And you have, there's one other argument, which is that when you do have preferential treatment, there's all this incentive to try to use tax accountants and lawyers to hide your ordinary income and turn it into capital gains, so it creates all these market distortions, too.
I think one of the most important things here is that the storyline behind why you want lower capital gains is to encourage investment, to encourage growth. But what we've seen is that that growth hasn't spread evenly across America.
Exactly.
And that's what's undermined the case for capital gains being lower, because the point wasn't, well, because you're investing, you deserve a lower tax rate. It's, if we give you a lower tax rate, it'll help everybody else out. That doesn't seem to be happening, and that's what's really going on.
Well, it's not just that the growth wasn't spreading, it's that the growth wasn't even that impressive to begin with. I mean, this is what's always struck me about the stats about, you know, how the people, the top 1% are getting almost all of the gains from economic growth in the last few years. That was true, or at least it was true as of 2012. I'll be interested to see what the updates look like with the better growth in the last couple of years. But the income growth for the top 1% wasn't impressive compared to the last couple of expansions. It was just that they were getting all of what was there. But it's not like people sort of have this idea of, you know, rich people
cut the income tax down to the level of where the capital gains tax is. Then we'll get the growth, and we'll see the benefits of the tax cut more widespread. That makes more, you know, but for some reason we're not hearing that, so you're only going to get the upward ratchet on the tax.
So is that, you said, you know, why don't Republicans run on a pro-growth tax cut plan? Are you're saying cuts in ordinary income rates is what you want to do?
I think that as long as you
middle and lower income people?
Across the board is what you would be great, but if you can only do it for lower and middle income people, that is also terrific. As long as you have growth, economic growth, slower than what it should be, you shouldn't be taking money away from the people who could spend it and increase that growth.
Then where do you balance that with concerns about debt and deficits?
You ignore that till you get growth to where it needs to be.
So that's, yeah, so this is, I mean, this is funny. We've had this artificial constraint the last 6 years. Someone was talking with me about, you know, in the Bush administration, Republicans were willing to spend money on things. It's, well, yeah, because there was this complete delinking of taxes and spending.
Right.
One interesting thing that was not in the State of the Union was anything about a gas tax, which was interesting because the president talked about the need to spend money on infrastructure. He talked about the need to focus on climate change and emit less carbon. And he talked about, at least implicitly, about the need to raise government revenue for various things because he had other things he wanted to do that cost money. So why didn't the president call for a gas tax, which was sort of an obvious solution to three of those problems?
I think it's because it seems like Democrats, especially in the president, for understandable reasons, are kind of reluctant to link anything the government, you know, more money for what the government needs to do with people, you know, a wide range of people paying any more to the government. And the gas tax is something that really does affect the broad middle of the country. And there just really hasn't been any willingness to kind of link, you know, we need infrastructure, so we need to pay for it. That linkage hasn't really happened, unless it's for like the very narrow group of people that say pay lots of capital gains tax.
It's good policy, and it's absolutely dreadful politics, unfortunately. I mean, I would love to see the president start that argument, especially now that he does have nothing to lose and nothing is going to pass through Congress, and he doesn't have to run for re-election. He doesn't have to protect red state Dems. The fact is that we do need to fund our infrastructure. The Highway Trust Fund, as you point out, is like dreadfully underfunded. One argument I would say against the policy is, in theory, we want to be moving away from using gasoline altogether, and of course, upping the gas tax would help us along that path. Mm-hmm. But that also ties our infrastructure funding to something that we want to be going away. So that, I mean, that's one reasonable argument against a gas tax.
Isn't this a long-range problem for Democrats, though? It's part of a broader thing where the line from Democrats, at least through the entire Obama administration, is the government should do various things and rich people should pay for it. And since Democrats think that the tax system should be more progressive, you can do that for a while. You can, for some period, expand the government and raise taxes on the rich. But don't liberals eventually need to be able to make the case that government is a worthwhile thing that you personally should be willing to pay for, not just that some rich guy should pay for?
Yes.
How do they make that shift and make that case?
It's brutally hard because both, I mean, and I would say that Democrats, you're absolutely right, have been saying, you know, we want to give you everything and we want this person over here to pay for it, when really I think paying taxes is a patriotic thing. I'm glad to be able to help support roads and schools and things in my state, in my city, in my country. But Republicans on the other side have also had this argument that, you know, you don't have to pay any taxes and growth is going to be so amazing that we don't even have to pay taxes. Everything's just going to work. And no, of course, we're not going to cut Social Security or Medicare, so don't worry about that. So both parties have participated.
So it's okay to live in a fantasy
land?
land?
You can have everything fantasy land. That is the reality of our politics.
I actually, to defend fantasy land for a minute.
Okay.
I think that the bigger problem with our politics right now is we have interest rates at record low levels. The government can borrow at almost nothing from the entire world.
Right.
Why are we afraid of debt?
I agree.
That right now should be the time that we are borrowing,
totally
leaving
true.
money in the pockets of the Americans, building whatever infrastructure we want, because we can borrow
nobody's making
amount.
that fantasy land.
That's right.
Nobody.
Where is that fantasy land?
It's amazing to me how nobody in Washington will stick up for this idea. Even on the left, you would think that there would be somebody who would say, hey, we shouldn't be afraid of
It
debt.
could be left or right, right?
They're
Because
so
the
chastened
right...
by this stupid, like, oh, your household has to balance their checkbook, so of course, governments are very different from your household, but Democrats are so afraid of this common sense
My credit
narrative.
card rate is a lot higher than the government, than the
can't
U.S.
print money.
Treasury's rate.
And you're still borrowing on
Right.
it. So, but so I don't think it's just that. I think it's actually that Democrats are just really into tax increases on the rich. As a fairness thing, I also think get them while we can is part of the idea. And so I think they feel like if they argued for deficit spending, one, they'd obviously get beaten over the head by Republicans who would say you're being fiscally irresponsible, whatever. But I think they also feel like they're missing their like Overton window for getting
This made it into Obama's State of the Union speech. He said, look, the capital gains tax might be good economics, but it's bad social policy. This is so he really, and I think Obama has always looked at taxation more as a social policy issue, meaning furthering equality, rather than as a sort of fiscal economic issue.
That might be the case, but there is a case for looking at it as an economic issue. I mean, there's increasing research showing that broader prosperity is actually good for growth, important for growth. And also, if you look at our political system, it is so captured by the very top of society. Average Americans, literally, scientifically, have no say in what goes on in terms of legislators' preferences. And that is because of massive inequality. So policies that aim to help address that, I think, are good for the country and are good for prosperity.
Yeah, I think there was one sleeper policy in the State of the Union I think we're going to hear more about over the next decade within this cap gains tax issue, where the president proposed two things. He wanted to raise the rate again to 28. Currently it's 23.8. He also wanted to change a rule that's called step-up basis. And what that means is that if you own stock or whatever and you die, you bequeath it to your heir, and they get it as though they had bought it at the value at the time of your death. So whatever gain there was that accrued between when you bought it and when you died never gets taxed.
Right.
Now, you might have an estate tax liability depending on your exact situation, but a lot of people, let's say you leave $3 million, you're not going to owe any estate tax because you're under the limit,
right,
and you avoid all your capital gains tax. And the president's saying, let's get rid of that rule. That doesn't make any sense. There are two interesting things about this. One is it raises a lot of money. It raises more money than raising the rate another 4 points does. But the other thing is that arguably this could be good for the economy, because what the rule about step-up basis does right now is you try to hold all your assets until you die, because you can't access that tax break except by dying. And so, for example, I used to be a real estate banker here in New York, and you deal with all these rental apartment buildings that, like, they've been in the family forever. They're split 17 ways among cousins, none of whom have any idea how to run an apartment building, but they can't sell it because they're waiting until they die to get that step-up basis improvement. And so you have all this real estate run by people who don't know how to do it. You get other businesses. People talk about, oh, you don't want to break up family businesses. Well, sometimes you do. Sometimes the family people don't want to be in that business. They just can't sell it for tax reasons. So it seems to me that this might actually lead to a more efficient allocation of capital in the economy, with businesses actually owned by people who know how to run them, in addition to raising revenue.
Yeah, but I think you kind of laid out the political problem. I mean, it wasn't that recently where the estate tax turned into death tax, and even having a $3 million exemption was an incredibly difficult, job by Democrats even to get that in. And you literally say, people have buildings, they have real stuff that's tied up in this, and they're going to be incredibly resistant to any change in the basis rules, and they're the people, as Crystal said, that have the most influence.
No politician wants to stand up and say, sorry, your family farm is now going to be taken away from you.
Family farm thing
But I
is
mean,
so absurd,
I agree, but that's going to be the thing that kills it.
But it's not taken away from you. You sell it, and then you get a whole bunch of money. Don't some of these people with the family farms, wouldn't they rather have the money, even if they have
a lot of them.
Well, that's the thing. No one's making them sell it either. Like, if they want to hold on to it and pass it on to their heirs, that's fine. Their heirs just there's a tax consequence
Believe
to
me,
that,
the tax
as there is on
accountants
everything else.
love this idea because
they have to figure out the new values.
They're already finding out ways to put things into trusts so that there's no event that makes the step up happen. Because that's what you do, right? You, instead of owning the stock directly, you put the stock into a trust. Then it doesn't pass on to anybody. The trust passes on,
right?
And so therefore you never get the step up.
Tax accountants who are watching are loving this.
That's funny, actually. I got an email from an economist saying that President Obama is referring to this as the trust fund loophole, and he's saying that's exactly wrong because the only way that you're not getting this loophole now is if the thing's in a trust fund. It's going to lead people to put things in trust funds.
Yeah, but still,
to get a different loophole.
It is smart messaging.
Yes.
Maybe he should call it. Somebody over the weekend suggested he call it the Paris Hilton Opportunity Act or something like that. And that's kind of good.
You know, this is related also back to the bank tax that we talked about. What's going to happen when you put this bank tax on? It's not just bank tax because it's all big financial institutions. You're immediately going to see a zillion off-balance sheet entities pop up that will own the assets. Because what people would do is structure their corporations so that they're not paying this tax.
Can we like make them count the? I mean, I don't know exactly how
we can try really hard, but the thing is, like what history teaches is, however we direct taxes at the ultra wealthy figure out ways not to pay those taxes.
So we just shouldn't bother trying to. Let's just give up.
Or we should at least be careful of the structures that might come up.
That is a fair warning. Okay, everybody, stick around. After the break, we're going to talk about the week's 2 important inflation stories, only one of which involved Tom Brady's balls. That's next. I'm back with Matt Zeitlin, Crystal Ball, and John Carney. So this was a week that people talked a lot about things being inflated and whether they're being inflated enough. And of course, mostly they were talking about Mario Draghi and the European Central Bank. Yeah, so big announcement from the European Central Bank this week. They're going to have this very large quantitative easing program. The market's been reacting to it. Are we finally going to see a turnaround in Europe? John,
I'll tell you, I don't think that QE will work as well as the ECB thinks it will. What tends to work actually is the run up to QE. When people anticipate QE, then you see bond rates drop, and that's already happened. So we're probably already seeing the benefits of QE, and once you actually do it, The only reason you have to do it is so that people will believe that you're going to do it the next time you say you're going to do it. But so there's not going to be a big benefit to it actually coming around.
So you think they've already gotten the benefits?
They've already gotten whatever benefit they're going to get.
Even though this was bigger than people expected?
Yes, I mean, that's the other trick you have to do, right? You have to promise QE, then you have to do it a little more because people then anticipate that you're going to do it a little more. And that's what happened in the U.S. We saw time and time again, actually, that bond rates dropped prior to QE. QE gets announced, and they go up. Why is that? Because the benefit comes before the action.
But so when does the part come where this actually flows through to the real economy and people's incomes go up and the economy improves? Like the
Are you
theory,
talking about the United States?
That's
I've
what
been
I was
asking
wondering,
that as
too.
well. Yeah.
Right, yeah. But I mean, so like, isn't the idea is supposed to be that by pushing bond rates way down, people are like, oh, I don't want to buy bonds because I won't get any money, so I'd better actually like build a factory or something. When do we get to see that happen? Like, because that's, I mean, that's why the stock markets went up yesterday, right? Is that they think that this is going to grow the economy.
Well, what we've seen is it inflates stocks in the U.S., but doesn't necessarily contribute to very much economic growth at all. I don't think it's impossible for something like QE to work, but I don't think buying sovereign bonds works very well. I think actually QE mainly works if you're in a lot of financial distress, as the United States was. So the first round of QE worked very well, I think. But subsequent rounds, which is the equivalent of what's happening in the Eurozone right now, I don't think that's going to be.
I mean, that's part of the problem too, right? Is that this is so late in the game, right?
But I
It should
think
have been done much earlier.
Yeah.
And I mean, but the other issue is like they don't have a lot of tools.
But
Tools at their disposal.
I think that's important that they're doing something, because it actually shows that the ECB under Mario Draghi understands that like growth and deflation are problems where a lot of European policymakers seem to think that, you know, the worst possible thing you can have is, you know, just a smidgen above 2% inflation, that, you know, growth is questionable when it's spurred on by central bank activity. But I think Mario Draghi is really saying very, very clearly, like, I care about growth, I care about reversing deflation, and that's kind of an important policy shift. And it's mostly signaling, it's mostly him saying that, but, you know, putting, you know, 60 billion euros a month behind it, it's also important.
Well, and it's also, the signal is not just that he was willing to do it, but that he was able to
Exactly.
beat the Germans over the head and get them to acquiesce to it. And
Finally.
Right. And you had all these agreements about what if one of these countries whose bonds we bought defaults on them? Who's responsible for that? And they ended up deciding that it would be mostly the national central banks that would cover those costs.
Right.
So it's basically the Germans are terrified of the idea that they're going to end up bailing out the Spanish or the Italians. Or something.
I have to say, I think this is like such a ridiculous premise. So you have a central bank, the European Central Bank, and what if Greece decides that it can't pay off all its bonds? And so it doesn't pay the European Central Bank some of the money that should be owed to it. What happens? Nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Yeah.
There's nobody's in trouble. Nobody lost
one's
any
on the
money.
hook.
Everything's fine. This is a phony concern for bookkeeping reasons, and I don't see why you should guide your economic, fiscal, and monetary policies around nothing but bookkeeping. It should be designed at real-world problems.
Well, I think we've learned in the Euro crisis is that, you know, perception that bailouts are happening is incredibly important, and so you need a lot of political finesse, which Mario Draghi has, and it seems like it's kind of finally working.
There's an analog with the financial crisis that we saw here. I mean, people were so upset by the idea of us doing anything to help homeowners that they saw as irresponsible that, you know, they freaked out and formed the Tea Party. So
Well, and with banks, like we had to lie
Yeah.
about what TARP was for and say that it was going to be for buying assets, and then what they do, of course, is they go and lend the money to banks to recapitalize them. right?
There's also a little bit of a problem with the theory of QE, and we're going to see it in Europe, is that when governments are paying interest to people, that's income people are getting. When you lower the interest rates, you're actually lowering people's income. And when you're taking bonds out of the system altogether, you're lowering the total amount of bonds that are paying interest to people. So there actually could be a deflationary aspect to QE here, because there's fewer bonds in circulation that are paying interest to the private sector.
John,
That
this
doesn't sound
idea-
right.
What about this idea, though, that, I mean, because one of the things you talked about, people are going to go and they're going to build factories, right? And part of the reason why they think that might happen is because it helps weaken the euro and helps, you know, increase exports. And then you do have that factory building impact.
And we did see a real weakening in the euro this week. So
That's
it's-
right.
it's working in
I
that
think
channel.
that is possibly a stronger aspect of this. Although, you know, again, if it has somewhat deflationary effect, meaning governments are paying less euros to the holders of bonds, I'm not sure the euro will keep weakening. I think we may have seen the weakening that's going to happen already, rather than more QE weakening further.
Okay, buy euros, John Carney says. Okay, just quickly, I want to get to the other big inflation story this week. Let's go to Tom Brady talking about his balls.
I didn't alter the ball in any way. I have a process that I go through before every game where I go in and I pick the balls that I want to, the footballs that I want to use for the game. When I pick those footballs out, at that point, to me, they're perfect. I don't want anyone touching the balls after that. I don't want anyone rubbing them, putting in the air in them, taking the air out. To me, those balls are perfect, and that's what I expect when I show up on the field. I feel like.
So we can giggle about this a little bit, and we missed the bit at the end where he says that some guys like old balls. But this story, I mean, this comes after a really rough year for the NFL with the scandals over Ray Rice and all of the head injuries, and to what extent does this flow through in terms of people being less interested in professional football? If people think the Patriots may have cheated their way into the Super Bowl?
I think people are more interested.
Exactly.
I think this is great for the NFL. Super Bowl ratings are going to be through the roof because everyone wants to see what do they do with the balls, and how are Tom Brady's balls, and how do they recover from this, and does this spur them on to feel like everybody's against us? So I think this is actually great for the NFL. Sadly,
as interested as Crystal is in Tom Brady's balls, I think that
actually not my type.
I want to just say that I think that this is bad long term. That when we saw things like this in similar sports, in baseball, whether it was strikes in sports or whether it was cheating scandals in sports, it actually tends to have a long term. It drives fans away in the long term, and I think you may see that because people start to say, you know what? I'm not interested in a fixed game. I wanted to see, a straight game play.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between a little bit of less air in the football for this game versus in with a baseball. I mean, it seems much more central and much more critical.
I also think that having the Patriots as a villain is something that any NFL fan outside of the New England area can really unite.
Steve Kornacki would really disagree with you.
Yeah, but I'm sure he would. But everyone wants to see the Patriots lose, and then having Bill Belichick as this kind of henchman master.
But what if they win the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Then what does that do to the NFL brand?
That enrages everyone and wants them to, their team to make the comeback.
But, Darth Vader wins at the end of Empire Strikes Back, and people still watch Return of the Jedi.
That is an excellent point. Okay, that's going to do it for 3 cents today. Be sure to check us out every Friday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, right here on Shift by MSNBC.